welcome Karen Brown, President of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I thought I'd start, at the end of February, I noticed that ETFO had published a press release on the subject of mental health in schools and the need for fully funded mental health supports for students. And I saw a quote in that paragraph that I thought was really pertinent for what we're discussing today. So I'm just going to somewhat unusually just read the whole paragraph.
Okay.
ETFO members report feeling overwhelmed and concerned about the volume of support that is expected from them, curriculum implementation, closing learning gaps, and addressing increased mental health needs. Although educators are strongly committed to supporting student mental health, they are not mental health professionals. They do not possess the specific skills required to address complex mental health needs, some of which can lead to violence in schools. When mental health needs go unaddressed, violence increases. Just to sort of get us going in this conversation, maybe you could tell us more about the sorts of challenges that teachers face every day when they go into a classroom.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know that since the pandemic, students have had a great deal of issues that they were dealing with mental health issues, coping issues, and then coming back to in-person learning. We have not seen the investment in resources that are needed in the system. So what we're seeing are students who are not properly being assessed on time. So the identification of their needs, there's a delay in that because of the lack of psychologists. They're not getting the opportunity, them and their families, to be supported because social workers aren't present within the school system. So we're seeing students who aren't being identified, and that means that if they're also a delay in identification, they're not getting the support. So no one's actually there to provide the resources, the training, the supports, the things that those students would need to succeed. So we're seeing some of those behaviors being acted out in the classroom. So some of our most vulnerable students are students with special needs, and just our students who have overall behavioral issues. So, our members are complaining, and I don't want to say complaining, they're addressing the concerns that they're hearing in the classroom around, being hit, being kicked, being bitten, desks being thrown, having to evacuate the classroom, sometimes daily, sometimes 2-3 times a week. So those are some of the challenges. So learning is being interrupted. And the students are witnessing violence against their teachers, their educators. So it could be an early child educator, it could be the classroom teacher. So students are seeing that. We're seeing almost a normalization of that behavior. And there's been a concern in regards to how administrators are responding to some of these concerns. So that's sort of what we're seeing.
I think you raised a couple of points that we've heard raised as well. We've done some sort of background research in preparation for doing this episode. I spoke to a few teachers, and those are certainly themes that came up. That normalization of a level of violence, and I think definitely a major theme that we heard was that teachers don't feel that they have the backing of the administration when things happen. In fact, something we've heard multiple times is this kind of idea that something bad happens, the teacher is blamed. Well, you're not following the procedures properly, you're not doing things right, therefore it's your fault, which kind of victim blaming, really. Is that something you're familiar with?
We conducted our first survey in 2019. So we've been addressing the issue of violence since 2017. And a majority of our members at that time, about 68%, indicated that they reported a physical force issue to their principal or vice principal, to their school administrators. And at the same time, that many felt that these concerns were not addressed seriously. So they weren't acted on immediately. And sometimes there was a concern that it was a classroom management issue, that the teacher wasn't managing the class well, and those were the issues, as opposed to looking at some of the underlying issues in advocating for more supports. So the administrators themselves, are also overwhelmed, but to really having those conversations to look at the root cause, and that was part of the some of the information that came out earlier when we did our first survey. We're actually in the process of conducting our second survey now. Was that our members also had a fear of reporting these incidents because they didn't feel that the concerns were acted on. Many were concerned about reprisal. Those were some general concerns that we got out of that. So
Yeah,
what
I
we
can echo that. I just want to echo that as well,
Mhm.
because again, the people, the teachers we've spoken to, and for a variety of reasons, it didn't feel comfortable coming onto a podcast as well, but were willing to sort of speak off the record.
Mhm.
I think they're called green sheets, or they used to. They're probably digital now, but there's incident reporting paperwork. There's
Mhm.
a strong culture of discouraging teachers from filling in that paperwork to record incidents, which seems to me as a layperson unforgivable, and also asking for trouble. But I guess it's about protecting school statistics and reporting to the province and things like that. Is that the kind of reason why that might happen?
I think it's a gentle balance with acknowledging that we have violence in the schools. That necessarily, when we're talking about violence, we're not talking about violent students. We're talking about the behavior, and we're talking about why these behaviors are occurring. And so sometimes the system gets its back up because no one wants to hear anyone say that we have violent students, and that's not what we're
Right.
saying. We're
Yeah.
saying that, and I think that's part of it. Once you're filling out a violent incident, it's sort of um, putting a negative perception on students,
Mhm.
and that's not what we're trying to do. I think we're trying to have a conversation to say there's interrupted learning that's happening here, and everyone is benefiting if the students get the support, and if administrators look at what is being reported and come on board to work together so that that student can succeed and everyone else in the class. That it's not automatically that the teacher is not doing what they need to be doing, or the educator is not supporting the class and not managing those behaviors appropriately. And so we're working on that. We're working to see that it goes beyond that. We're looking at what sort of supports are students getting, and they're not getting the supports.
To the average Joe or Jane who's listening to this episode, and they might have a kid in the system, they might be shaking their head at this and saying, like, how did we get here? Because I'm not I like to think of myself as young at heart, but back in my day when I went through elementary school, if I acted up, or if something happened that was escalated to that point, I would never have dared dreamed of doing it, because I'd be called down to the principal's office and given a talk to, and God forbid my parents be called, and I'd be, then it's game over, Joel.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, what are teachers saying that has changed, from the days past, or is this the same situation we're approaching to? Like, it seems to be a different culture in our school system that would allow this behavior to go kind of unaddressed or unanswered, and that we're just leaving it on teachers to do this. I'm just wondering, like, where did things kind of take a left turn from the olden days? And I'm sorry if I sound like a grumpy old man for saying that, but I think there are a lot of people who are listening saying what went wrong here.
Mhm, mhm. And I think part of that conversation is uh, people not understanding what's taking place within schools. And when I was in high school or elementary school was very different. There was a certain level of respect for the teachers. So the name calling that you're hearing, the racial slurs, the cursing, those sort
Right.
of things would have never happened in schools. So those are some of non-physical sort of violence that occurs. And there are a lot of different factors that are occurring now in regards to home situation, parents working, students on their own. There are a lot of things that create a different dynamics where parents are not as engaged, and they are trusting the system. And there are a lot of kids who are raising themselves, which is very, very different. But also, when I went to school, there was a guidance counselor, right? There was someone there. You could get a social worker. There were child and youth care workers. So if you got into an issue, there was someone there who could, they would take you aside. They could spend an hour with you, talking with you. There's no one to do that, right? There's no one to kind of guide students. There is a lack of those key support services that are not there. So if a child is having a very difficult day because there's something going on at home and they're lashing out at the teacher or the student, before you could, have someone right away to assist to help, those supports aren't there. You're waiting months for that to happen, and the teacher is expected to be able to deal with all that, know with all that, and we're not able to do that. And I think that it's a combination of those issues that you see. People had the time to do that.
That very much is a theme. I think that the teachers are put in the position of being social workers and mental health support, and they don't feel qualified or trained to fill that role, because it's like, no, we're here to educate, not to deal with the problems that society has, and everybody acknowledges that, and everybody is sympathetic to that, but we can't do all those things. I mean, do you think there's just well, I mean, I guess there's a number of related questions which really come back to sort of provincial government. Do you think there's a kind of policy of, we heard someone talking about healthcare last week, saying, this is a deliberate policy to create a culture of failure where people lose faith in public services. Do you think there's any sense that the same thing could be happening in education too?
Well, when a government releases its fiscal budget and it's got $2 million in surpluses, and we don't see any of that, did I say 2.1 billion? Correct myself, in surpluses, right? I mean, no, yeah, in surplus, and we don't see that invested in education, knowing what's happening in the system. There's a concern when we're seeing parents are giving money for tutoring, to take that money out of public dollars to invest in private tutoring, as opposed to providing that within the system where every child can get that support. Many parents are working out, are still working in the evening. And if they're not, they've finished work, they don't have the time to go to 2 hours or drive or take the bus, depending on your situation. So instead of a government investing those sorts of funds back into the system so that you can have smaller class sizes to give attention to those students, you can have the educational assistants that are there, it's more than, 1 to maybe 6 or 7 kids, those ratios are lower, they can get those attention. We're seeing this government not doing that. The Financial Accountability Office, I believe in the next 6 years, right, there's going to be over $6 billion of a further deficit. And so this government is not showing a commitment to doing that. And when you hear words like, parent choice, shouldn't parents have the choice? We're giving them this money so they can have the choice to pick their tutoring. It's really a way of moving towards privatization. As you said, watching the system crumble. You take out so much resource. Who wants to actually be within the public system? So instead of investing in good public services, education, and healthcare, we're seeing a slow erosion of dollars into the private system. We know many of those parents who receive this money don't send their kids to public school, and yet they're getting those funds. So there is definitely a deliberate attempt to create chaos and to undermine our good public system.
I think it should also be pointed out that, to say parental choice, as a parent, I know that I don't have a lot of choice where I live. It's not as if I can go down to the education market and buy the right curriculum for my kids at a discount price. That's not how the system set up, nor I don't think we want it to be. You know, I'm gonna. I just know, I know for a fact that there are parents sitting here and they're saying, you know, they're going to come back to the old tired trope of teachers have it so good. You know, you're just asking for more. I have to make do with what I got. Why don't you make do with what you've got? And that old argument that I think has been there since the education system was founded in Confederation. I want to give you the microphone. When he said, what do you say to that? The parent who just says, you know, you need to suck it up and just deal with it and teach my kid. Mm-hmm. What do you say to something like that that we're going to hear? I know we're going to hear in our responses to this episode.
Yeah, and I think it's challenging because everyone's been to school, so they think, I went through. It's no big deal. I made it. I'll be fine. But I think a lot of parents don't understand that the system has changed so dramatically. The supports and resources that were there are not there, and that you'd be surprised in regards to the amount of time that is interrupted during the day, that's taken away from your child, your grandchild, your nephew or niece's learning because of things of violence that's happening in the school. And so the working conditions, the supports that are there are students' learning conditions. So if they're learning in in overcrowded classrooms, they're not really learning, right? It's being they're not getting the attention. That's why people send their kids to private schools. Those great ratios of 1 to 15, it's not there, right? And so when you see students are struggling, it's because those resources that you might have had when in school. And it's not just about, teachers, just suck it up and do your job. We are doing our job, but we could do our job so much better if we had the supports to help your son, your daughter, your grandchild, mm-hmm. your nephew or niece succeed. And that's what it's about. Education is a great equalizer. And if we're not investing in that, that can't happen. Under the conditions, educators and teachers are doing the best they can despite that. But we're sort of trying to shine the light on some of the things that are happening. Because kids aren't going home and telling their parents, oh yeah, right. we had to, close down the classroom today. We had to evacuate the classroom today. Yet again, they're not having those conversations. So we're saying it's important. And that didn't happen when you and I were going to school, right?
I can vouch for that. I try to, when my kids come home from the end of the day and I try to say, hey, what did you do today? Nothing. Yeah. Okay. You stare at the wall for 6 hours. What?
But I mean, I can't. I mean, I've been given stories by a variety of teachers from across the 905, stories that I can't repeat because they could be personally identifiable to either a teacher or a student. I can't repeat them, but they would shock our listeners to hear this kind of things that happen fairly routinely. And certainly there's a ground level of disruption that happens every day in classrooms, where again the teacher may feel that basically one student out of 30 or 35 or however many the numbers are just dominates their attention to the exclusion of all the other students because their specific problems are not being properly addressed or properly supported. And again, it's not to in any way negatively imply anything negative about that student. It's the support that they need to be educated appropriately within the context of the wider school. And to kind of get across that message of just how bad things can be, and in prosperous communities like in Halton, or we're not just talking about sort of inner city schools here. It's happening everywhere. A point that was made to us by at least one person, I think it was probably multiple people, was that it's not a matter of if a teacher is killed, it's a matter of when. Because that that's the kind of level of problems that we see, and that when we report this or when we complain, we're told you're the problem. Now, okay, that's anecdotal. I'm not suggesting that what I've heard is reflective of the entire community of teachers. I don't know, but but that's pretty serious, a pretty serious sort of accusation of that suggests a very different situation to what I was familiar with when I was at school back in the dark ages.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty extreme, and you know, I'm with elementary. High school, we've seen lots of violence in the high schools, and you know, anything could happen. We're seeing a lot of gun violence where, you know, students are engaged, but that there's nothing that says an educator can land in the middle of that. I think what I also want to really highlight here is the emotional toll of what's happening with violence in schools and the lack of support. It's taking on the profession. You're seeing that there's a lot of fail to fills where they're having a hard time getting occasional teachers. That's because they're like, I'm not going into these schools. Our occasional teachers are like, they're not safe. I'm not being supported by administration. There aren't any resources, and I'm highly skilled and qualified. I can do something else for this level of putting myself at risk, right, physically, because not only there's a psychological pressure, and there's a physical pressure, and we're seeing that the trauma that our members are witnessing day in, day out. They're going home agitated, exhausted, tempered, because of what they've experienced or witnessed within the system, and they're leaving the system within their first 5 years. And so we're seeing that. You're seeing the faculty students are now, they're not even completed teaching, and they're in the classroom. School boards are trying to find anyone that's breathing to be an emergency supply, because people are saying the conditions are not what they used to be. And I can actually, you know, work somewhere else, less stress, and not witness and experience this violence. Many of our members have had concussions, have had injuries, but the shins, and have had really, you know, physical trauma. And and people are seeing that, and they're saying this needs to stop. We need to get these students support. Administrators need to take this seriously. The government needs to work on training for our administrators, for our educators around this, and so that we can actually do what we need to do. So to say it's not really an issue, we're seeing the impacts now where they're having a hard time getting people to come into the classrooms as teachers or early childhood educators, right? You're seeing the school bus driver or the crossing guard or someone's nephew or grandma being pulled in that day. And that shows a level of where the system is at. And parents need to be concerned, like who is that in front of their child? Is that even a qualified teacher? And we're hearing more and more, it's actually not. Is it a qualified early child educator? And absolutely not.
I mean, this problem is I think it's kind of, it seems so simple, but it's so big. And I'm wondering, from your perspective and from the teachers that you support, their perspective, what was driving this? Because it sounds like there's like a fear from the administration of these schools to put down discipline, or to put, you know, to hold to guidelines and just standards of behavior that you and I are expected to adhere to in our professional and day-to-day adult lives. We question, why don't we kind of impart this again onto children? But there's this reluctance to kind of step in, or to be on the side of teachers. Seems to be there from what you're describing. And I'm wondering, where do you think this reluctance or this fear of siding with teachers to go either to the province, or is it they're fearful of parental backlash? They feel that they don't have the parents on their side? Do they feel that the funding from the province is going to be cut off for their particular board if too many problems get brought up? You know, I guess just, where is this coming from? This fear that seems to exist in our school system where it didn't before.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, because no one wants to sort of identify a child too early, or make them appear to be a target or a stereotype, or sort of lump them into a particular category. So oftentimes you're erring on the side of caution, but not actually looking at some of the factors that are actually at play in this particular situation, and looking at it case by case. Sometimes we just take a blanket approach because it's much easier. And I'm just giving from some of the examples that I deal with. There are many good administrators in the system. I'm not saying
Mhm.
they're all, but I'm saying there is a great concern in wanting to address some of those behaviors. Is it depending on the community that they're in? Is it a highly over-engaged community? And so there's a concern around a parental pushback. Is there a philosophy of, oh, that's not really serious? But it's a combination of the factors. And I think, just because I'm an educator, it hasn't, lost an eye or broken an arm, that being kicked, hit, punched, spat at, desks thrown, chairs thrown is not normal and shouldn't
No,
be part of the job. And I think we're working with them to say that's not becoming part of a workplace expectation. It's almost like you're a teacher that comes with the territory. So there needs to be a philosophical shift as opposed to addressing it. And I think that's what we're seeing. Administrators are like, well, that's part of your job to deal with that. Well, no, part of our job is to deal with
yeah,
the students, and we need your support. So there's a lot of dismissiveness of what is actually quote unquote violence, or that's just normal behavior. That those are just kids acting out. Well, they shouldn't be. And if they are, we need to provide the supports. And sometimes it's taking the time to go through the identification to the resources. People don't want to do that. I don't have all the answers, but these are some
right.
of the things that our members are feeling are some of the reasons.
So it seems like there's a lot of really good intentions, is the impression I get, is like
Mhm.
good intentioned innovations coming from school boards or administration that sometimes don't entirely reflect the kind of reality on the ground. And I know, one of the buzzwords that I've kind of heard put around is like collaborative problem solving, which is the idea, which is a great sounding idea. It's like you have children who do something wrong, and rather than just sending them to the head, some old school kind of punishment, you try and work out the source of the behavior. And it's like, yeah, completely supportive of that kind of thing. But there also needs to be that kind of ground. There also need to be those boundaries of oh, there will be consequences if you cross this line. You cannot repeatedly be racist or homophobic or transphobic or use disgusting language or vandalize school property or attack a teacher without there being consequences. And it seems to me like that lack of consequences is really at the root of a lot of things that are going amiss here.
And that's what we're hearing from our members, that sometimes sometimes the students aren't given the opportunity to really reflect on their behavior and to be held accountable, and those conversations with parents and looking at an action plan and how do we correct that behavior, as opposed to sometimes it's just dismissed. And they'll go to the office and it's a fun time at the office for a while, and then they're back in the classroom, we hear.
Yeah.
And we know those are not, like I said, that's not the norm. um, but where is sort of that, there are things that are acceptable and not acceptable, and there are, you said, there are consequences, being accountable for your behavior. And they're, depending on the age of the child, what grade, those will adjust. And our members don't, we don't administer that discipline. That is the role of the principal.
Yeah.
But in regards to a reoccurrence and what fits, I think there's been conversations in regards to that, and there is a hesitancy in doing that. And we understand that, because some communities, some kids are targeted a little bit more, are more identified from some communities, racialized communities, Black communities, of being more disruptive. So there are some things there around discipline and different issues that are taken in consideration in regards to biases and all those situations. But our members are saying, overall, it needs to be taken much more serious before, like you said, something drastically happens for a school board or a government to wake up to the level of violence. Just because they're in kindergarten or grade 2 doesn't mean that they can engage in behaviors that hurt others, and students are witnessing this behavior and seeing it as acceptable.
Well, I mean, that's just said. I mean, I think we can all say, why would you be afraid of a grade 2 student? They're, probably like a third your size. But I think we kind of forget that the teacher can't be monitoring everyone in the class all the time. It's just not humanly possible. And what happens when that student crosses the line with another student to cause injury or some physical violence to them? Which is
Or to
something I don't.
themselves, or to themselves.
Absolutely.
Students who are physically harming themselves.
Let's. I'll put it back to you. Maybe somebody in the ministry is listening to this episode, and knock on wood, maybe Minister Lecce himself is listening. And if you are, come on the podcast. We have lots of questions for you.
To talk to you.
Yeah. What would you want? What do you want to see happen? What does ETFO want? I'm not asking for like your bargaining position, but just in a perfect world, the coffers are open, the plans are open, and you're able to rewrite how do schools operate in this regard. What would you want to see happen?
There absolutely have to be training for our educators on how to deal with some of these situations. So we're not experts in all sorts of mental health issues, but there needs to be ongoing training about reporting, evaluating, assessing. Training for our school administrators is key. We need to look at the resources. What is available to students? We need to invest in our social workers. We need to invest in our EAs, our child and youth care workers, psychologists. Those key supports are not there. Apparently we had all these school nurses during COVID. I didn't hear about too many of them, but they used to be a key factor coming into the schools. So those are critical. Those frontline support workers are needed more than ever because the issues that we're facing are so great, right? The mental health, People for Education released a report on the stressors that students and educators are feeling, right? So the level of mental health is rising. And in order to address that, that's key. And class sizes, we need to lower those class sizes so that they can get the more attention. You're hearing, oh, that one student in your child that might be violent. There's more than one, and there might be the child that's experiencing issues of violent outbursts, but there's a special needs child that needs that support. There's that child who's the slower learner. There's the gifted child who wants to excel, and so there are all these things, and they can all benefit with those one-to-one attention. And we need to be putting money into the system. So I think that's a key thing. We should not be taking money out of the system.
Is this a question of the system itself, not just in regards to this one topic, but overall, is very much a cookie cutter system that your child is expected to go and fit this mold. You're expected to learn math, history, English, science, geography, and you're supposed to learn it in a specific way and come out and be a top-notch, perfect citizen in Ontario. And I think we can all agree, after all of us have spent years in an education system, one form or another, it does not work like that. We all learn in a different capacity. We all have different interests and passions that drive us, and we have different talents that help us work out math problems faster than others, or some of us are able to read at a comprehensive level far greater than some of our peers at any given stage. It's about time that maybe we start addressing education in a more individualistic approach, and kind of find that flexibility to tailor an education system, not just to the students who need like an independent learning program, but just to kind of identify, like, okay, little Jimmy really does well at math, but he needs to work on reading comprehension. But little Janie loves art, but really struggles at math. being very generic here, but it's about time we start kind of rethinking education in that regard to help our students really succeed, which ultimately is what we all want, isn't it?
It is, and you talked about, not a one size fits all model. We're talking about students with special needs and giving them the tools that they need, funding based on their needs, not just because they fit in a particular category. You're getting this amount of money and that's it. But that comes also with teacher professional judgment and the ability
Mhm.
to modify the programming for a particular student. But with with standardization coming in, EQO testing, a lot of that it goes out the window when they're trying to make things so standardized. Where is that individualization? And that's where privatization comes in. You make it so standardized that anyone can deliver it. Doesn't have to be a teacher to deliver it, and it's a very rote system, and it's just based on the outcomes of a test, and that's snapshot in time. So it's not based on what the teacher would see that you're doing and those modifications that are being made to your program so that you can succeed. And that's what a true education system would look like. Yeah, a program would be that, and that's what teachers try to do, try to move you from one particular level to another based on your skills, right? And then that scaffolding, if you're excelling in science, to perhaps gear you into a particular direction for a project or those sorts of things, so you can see where you
Mhm.
actually shine. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has shown us, parents really do appreciate teachers a lot more and education
Mhm.
workers a
Mhm.
lot more as a result of the pandemic, having to been home with their kids, trying to do online learning just with their maybe one or two children, and seeing how it is with kids not
Yes.
paying attention and
Yes, indeedy.
falling asleep and just keeping their focus when it's just one child. So I think there are a lot of parent groups and communities that are going to be pushing for the importance of investing in the system, because they've experienced how some of the challenges and how challenging it is just to engage their own child. So I think there are some good things that came out of that, and parents are beginning to pay more attention and are been more vocal around the investments that are needed, having experienced that.
I know that just we're coming to the end of our time. We must let you go. Um, I was fortunate to have some excellent teachers as a child teachers who noticed that I struggled at school. I was not a good student, but had the time and the ability and the support in those days to find solutions for me that meant I could succeed, get to university eventually, and stay at university far too long. um, it's life changing. It's not life changing not just for me, but for everybody I know, and as a whole, life changing for the society that I'm a part of. I mean, I'm not talking about myself now. I'm just talking as a rule. Teachers are the foundation of so much. And education is the competitive advantage that we have in Ontario and in Canada with the rest of the world. It's like, what can we do that we can do better than other people? We can educate, and it's such an important thing. One final question for you. If there's any teachers listening to this podcast who feel that they are threatened in their classroom on a day-to-day basis, that they feel they are not safe, what should they do?
Mhm. I mean, every teacher has there's a union steward in their school, and if they don't, they should be contacting their local office, their local union office, to say, hey, I have a concern. They don't have to have it acted on right away, but they can listen and get some information on what their options are. Should they have filed an incident report? Is this something just with a conversation with the principal? Are they Should there be some things put in place in regards to a safety plan? So it depends, and they can guide them through, and it is confidential. I think people are often hesitant to contact the union office because, oh my gosh, I'm going to get in trouble if my administrator knows. It's all confidential, and they don't act. The union doesn't act on anything that you don't want us to act on. But to know your rights, it's important. Your right to refuse unsafe work. If you are feeling that you're in a violent situation and it's not safe, we can guide you through that process on what that is. But there are steps that can take place in advance, and we can support you to have those conversations. It might be just to give you the tools to have your conversations with your administrator. Some members aren't even aware of the incident forms, and we're saying, are you aware? And these are the steps, and if there's no action, these are the next steps. So it's to guide you through to protect you, and also just to encourage you that it's a great profession, that you are making a difference. That there are times that those particular issues can make you feel like, am I making a difference? And having been a teacher close to what I think I'm in my 30th year now, you are making a difference. There's always going to be one that you're going to run into at a McDonald's or a Burger King, and they say, hey, miss, I've had those, thank you for helping me here or there. So, I want to say that there is a student there that's appreciating your work and what you're doing. And we'll continue to advocate for you and for this government to appreciate you. I think what we're seeing is a devaluing of the profession, not appreciating the work that people are doing. You go into teaching because you love it. You go into being an early childhood educator because you love it. And I encourage those who are having some challenges to let us know. There are also supports through EAP if you're experiencing any sort of trauma and need those additional psychological supports, because it can be quite traumatic to witness some of those things. But that we are here and we're fighting for to improve your conditions, whether it's through bargaining or through general conversations, through lobbying. We know it's important, and we'll continue to do that. But don't hesitate to reach out to us. And as I said, communities and parents are beginning to mobilize and organize around some of these concerns, which is great.
Karen Brown, President of EFTO, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.